started. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Palmer, the Executive Director of the Travel and Tourism Research Association. Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Today's Data and Identifying Landscape for Smarter Digital Advertising, presented by our TTRA partner, Epsilon. TTRA unites university academics, professional practitioners, and research experts, the best and the brightest from the travel and tourism research community. If you're not a member, I encourage you to join us. You can learn more at TTRA.com. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit the TTRA website for information about upcoming webinars and conferences. As a reminder, the Marketing Outlook Forum will be taking place February 6th through the 8th in Houston, Texas. I'll drop the link in the chat. Please register and join us in Houston. Before we introduce today's guest speaker, I want to remind everyone that we're using the Zoom webinar platform. Please drop your questions into the Q&A and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. I would like to introduce today's speaker, Andrea Godfrey, Senior Director of Travel and Tourism Solutions for Epsilon. With a passion for advancing travel and tourism industry, Andrea has over a decade of travel research, development, and advertising experience. She has expertise in leveraging data to enhance marketing efficiency and promote industry advocacy. Besides leading data acquisition, solutioning, and expanding global travel enterprise initiatives in her previous roles, she also served in research roles for the state of Texas and Georgia Department of Economic Development. Welcome, Andrea.
Wonderful. No, thank you for the kind introduction. And it looks like I was looking at the attendee list here. It looks like we have people with us today all the way from Halifax down to the Gulf Coast area. So thank you everybody for joining us. I'm going to echo what Kathy said about Marketing Outlook Forum coming up. It's going to be in Houston this year. So for those of y'all that are up north, and would like an opportunity to warm up a little bit, not only is the content, Marketing Outlook Forum is one of my favorite conferences. I've been going since, I think it's 2012, which means a decade. Just kind of aged myself there a little bit, but the content is wonderful and it's a great opportunity to kind of shake off some of that snow and head down south. So let's see here. I am going to shift over to start showing my deck with y'all. It is such a pleasure to be here with everybody today. I am going to make sure that we have time for questions. I've had a couple of colleagues across the industry that, knowing this topic, sent me a few questions that I'm going to be covering at the end as well. And then, as Kathy mentioned, please drop them in the chat with the view that I have. I'll be able to see them afterwards. So today, we're knocking on the door of the holidays. In fact, I'd actually say we are elbow deep in the holiday season. And we're starting to look ahead to 2023. Just this morning, the CEO of United Airlines was on CNBC talking about the outlook for 2023. Other travel brands have really been talking about what the next year looks like. And today, what I'd like to do is have kind of a conversation and talk about some of the topics that are really shaping how we develop our strategy and really are shaping both the tail and the headwinds that we have as we move into next year. So, before we kind of start jumping into those topics, Kathy did a very kind introduction about myself. I'm a travel enthusiast. I started being interested in travel back in my undergraduate work. I studied abroad and decided that I never wanted to stop traveling, and truly do believe in the power of travel and the benefit that it has for our communities. And so, as she mentioned, I am with Epsilon. I joined Epsilon about 6 months ago. It has been a very interesting time to be in the travel industry and such a great time to join the team here at Epsilon. So we actually started working in the travel and tourism space back in 2019. So for our vertical in the company, it's been a pretty interesting few years. So for those of y'all that aren't familiar with us, so we work with first-party data and identity-based solutions to deliver performance and outcome-based marketing solutions. We really have some unparalleled scale. As you can see here, we have about 200 million US customers that are identified in our data set. If you do the math on that, that's the majority of adult Americans. We also have a great deal of transaction-based data. I see a couple clients with us today. So y'all are probably familiar with that transaction insights. And We have two sides of the house for the travel and tourism industry. I have the pleasure of working with travel brands, so working closely with Marriott, Hertz, United Airlines, a lot of cruise partners. And then also we have the tourism side of the house, which is where we get to work with Tourism Amsterdam, Virginia Tourism, Choose Chicago, and then a few others that we have here on the call, but I won't call y'all out specifically right now. But this really allows us to have such a great perspective on the industry, that from the seat that I sit in, I get to really pull a lot of the insights that y'all as clients share with me to build different solutions. So today we're going to talk about 4 topics. 3 of them are 3 of the primary shifts and factors in the marketplace right now that are really shaping it. And then we're going to close after we go through those 3 and talk about really why it's important for travel destinations and for travel brands to really increase their market share today. So we're going to talk about the current state of the digital ecosystem. And then we're going to talk about cookies and the cookie deprecation roadmap. This is an ever ebbing and flowing time frame for all of us. And then also we're going to talk about travel identity and why it is important. And we're going to actually talk about what identity is, and what it is for the destination marketers and the travel marketers, and why it matters so much for us. So let's start by kind of setting the stage with talking about the current tech and digital industry landscape. So, as 2022 winds down, which I still can't believe it's starting to wind down, our world looks incredibly different than it did in January, which actually is not surprising given the rate of disruption and change we've been seeing the last 3 years. While digital has been going through this large evolution, really since the 1980s, we've seen this accelerated during the pandemic. And there's been a great deal of disruption in the marketplace for travel and tourism as well. So there's a lot of evolution happening, both at a macro and a micro level. Digital is going to continue to be front and center of the changes for our industry. Both the digital work environments that we now have being able to be remote. Adam Sachs was doing the biannual travel forecast update with US Travel last week. And as he said, this blending of leisure and people working while they're away on travel is not a trend that we saw in the pandemic. It is now the new normal. We also have, of course, digital being at the forefront of advertising. And then for travel and tourism, talking a lot about consumer engagement. We are such a different and unique industry in that not only is the consumer journey very complex, but also it's such a high touch product offering that we have both in the digital and the in-person when persons are traveling within our destinations and with our brands. Really, a primary factor impacting the travel and tourism industry specifically, as well as digital, is talent changes. Kathy and I were talking before we joined here, and we were talking about the gaps in the workforce. The November jobs report here in the US, we saw that leisure and hospitality employment was the primary beneficiary of job growth last month. But notably, it still remains well below the 2019 levels. And this is a global issue. For those of y'all joining us from Canada, and then even those who will be watching this recording abroad on a much nicer time zone for y'all, some of our APAC members with TTRA, this is something that we're seeing at a global perspective. And really, turnover and employment has become an evergreen issue, and finding the right people for our teams is going to be an ongoing challenge. And when we talk about digital and marketing, there's really this large demand that's happening right now for teams to acquire more digital skills. And this is driving both a shuffling of teams and an expansion of teams, and then a reskilling of our existing members. And when we talk about employee retention, especially in the travel and hospitality space, this is a great opportunity that we can lean into to help upskill our team members that we do have to help to retain them. When we talk about this from an advertising and a marketing standpoint, what this means for us is that both with agencies and in-house and organizations that we're dealing with a lot of change in staffing. And so having solutions for us that we're having to re-educate or that are difficult from an onboarding perspective is something that companies and destinations really don't have the luxury of right now. And when we talk about where we're headed as an industry, keeping that in mind when we think about how we work with our partners, and then even the partners that we bring in as, advertisers and marketers. This is really important, making sure that we have those partners that can help us both upskill, educate, but also have that speed to market and ease of onboarding with our solutions. So then, of course, we could not be talking about the current landscape without talking about the rise of the metaverse. So from the dot-com boom of the 90s that built the internet of data to the rise of social with the internet of people in the 2000s and the internet of things in 2010s, the metaverse signals the next wave of digital transformation. Leaders really should begin today to prepare for how to create opportunities in the metaverse. So Accenture does a technology vision executive survey, and they asked if executives are beginning to consider the possibilities of the metaverse. And 53% of travel executives state that the metaverse will have a positive impact on their organizations, with 25% actually expecting a breakthrough or transformational impact. When we talk about the metaverse, I start to think back when, social started to take over in our industry, and brands are going to likely lead the way with this new tech evolution in travel. DMOs will follow in suit, most likely. And this opens the doors for greater partnership and collaboration. So oftentimes as destination marketers and as travel brands, there's this gap that has to be bridged in terms of how do we work together to benefit and support one another. And with brands leading the way in the metaverse, this really opens opportunities because think about the capabilities here. This now provides new ways for visitors to explore destinations. We can show past visitors things they may have missed, or for our mobility impaired visitors, really expand our destinations for them, showing them different opportunities or allowing them to engage in different ways, or just people who didn't have time to experience certain things at our destinations. They can go to the metaverse, they can be inspired, and they can be inspired to come back and be that repeat visitor. So for any of y'all that might be meeting planners or work with events, imagine being able to show your hotel options in the metaverse, or tour your event space in the metaverse and meet with other meeting planners and sales teams and being able to sell that product that way. Or for your business or leisure travelers that are going to continue to be so important for our industry, showing them and allow them to engage with the amenities or the different options that they have for remote working at your travel brand or in your destination. There's a lot of opportunity here for us to increase exposure to our destinations, but also to really be able to drive different economic opportunities. So then there's the cookie evolution. So you probably are noticing that it says evolution and not deprecation here. So this is a constantly moving target, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit more depth. But if you've noticed, putting a line in the sand of when the cookie is going to be no more, this essentially is a futile exercise. As many things as our industry, this is a moving target when we talk about travel recovery or shifts in consumer behavior or even sentiment. It's an ebbing and a moving guidepost, but nonetheless, it's something that we really need to prioritize, understanding how to future-proof our organizations. I feel like future-proof is kind of like the new normal was about 2 years ago. I think we're all tired of hearing it, but it's imperative. We'll talk about why that is here in a little while. So really, when we talk about cookies and cookie deprecation, it's not just about cookie deprecation, but it's also about privacy. We need to keep a very close pulse on changing data privacy policies. And we need to be fully educated on really what cookies mean and really why not all cookies are the same. So let's talk about kind of the cookie deprecation roadmap and then understanding the different types of cookies. I always, whenever I think about cookies, I want to make sure that we included a picture of actual tasty treats, because that's exactly what I think about, and that makes it a little bit more entertaining. So third-party cookies are fading, and they're fading fast. And so in the name of consumer privacy, browsers are eliminating those third-party cookies and other common identifiers such as device IDs. This started back in 2017 when Safari removed third-party cookies. That was about 36% of browser share. Then, Firefox here in 2019, only about 4%, but still it was notable when Firefox made that change because it was showing that this was happening across platforms. This wasn't going to be just Safari specific. This was going to be across multiple platforms. This was going to touch all of our industry. iOS back in 2021 limited the use of its IDFA on iOS apps and devices. And then, of course, when we look to 2023, Google originally targeted this year for ending support or cookies in Chrome. But as we all see, for everyone that has probably been to a website today and had to accept the cookie policy, cookies are still around. But this has now moved to 2023, and they more recently are saying that it's going to run a bit longer. So along this journey of the evolution of the cookies and its capabilities, these permissions will actually impact our ability to not only target, but gain insights from and longitudinally evaluate our customers and marketers. So what's very important here is, and I kind of looking at some of the persons who are with us today, and also, thinking about this from an insights perspective, so many of the insights that we get from digital are cookie-based. And that's something that we have to keep in mind is, what does the deprecation and the evolution of cookie policy mean for us? Whenever cookies do go away, it's not necessarily this ripcord. I think about Flock during the pandemic. So Google tried to release Flock in Asia during the pandemic. They had to claw it back. And then ultimately trying to replace it with Topics API, which is still in evolution, despite the large press push that we saw earlier this year. It still is a moving target. But with that, this impacts our data and our data persistency and our ability to track our consumers on a longitudinal basis. So let's start with just a basic here. I want to touch on what is a third-party cookie. I'm not going to read this slide here, but I'm going to talk while y'all spend some time with this slide. So a cookie stores limited information from a web browser session on a given website that can then be retrieved in the future. At its basic, this is your elevator, asking someone in an elevator, you've got 4 floors. That's what a cookie is. And they can explain it to you that quickly. So there are 2 primary buckets that we define cookies. The first is first-party cookie. So this is created, published, and controlled by the website that it is visited. It is owned by that first party. Then we have third-party cookies, which is what we're really talking about here, that are being deprecated. And there's this huge evolution that's happening. So these are set by a third party, so often an ad tech provider, via code placed on the domain. So these allow advertisers to track users across the internet and target where that user goes, and then ultimately do that cross-site tracking. Often I've noticed that cookies get mixed up with terms like pixels, tags, scripts, but it's important to note that these are not all the same things. And today we're talking about the cookie itself. So that's what is storing that limited information from the browser. So third-party cookies have always been flawed. They are not people-based. They are based on and represent the browsing session on a device. They don't go back to specific people. So this can lead to inaccuracy when people share devices or they have multiple browsers open during the session. Oftentimes myself, I have Safari for some items. I've got Chrome open for others. So this is not people-based. Third-party cookies are not. They're not interoperable. So they are domain specific and can't be read by other domains. So a significant amount of data is lost with third-party cookies, and they are not persistent. So they can be deleted by browsers and by users. So clearing out your cookies. And so over time, you really can't longitudinally track an individual and build insights off of them with accuracy by using third-party cookies. And then ultimately, they're not transparent. Really, transparency is so important because so much of what we do in terms of how we personalize and engage with our visitors is by being able to get data from them. So it's that zero-party data that they actively are willing to share with us. And so whenever we are not transparent with that, that's where we see things like the Cambridge Analytica and items like that. People are less willing to give us the information that we need to be able to create the right experience for them. And for us, persistency is so important in our industry because, as I mentioned earlier, and as we're all well familiar with, we compared to a consumer packaged good or a retail supplier, we have a very complex consumer journey. And so we do need to track across multiple sites, across a long period of time, because this isn't something like a Coca-Cola or maybe a hot dog, a Costco hot dog, which a lot of us love. It's not something you buy once a month or once a week. People are buying trips on longer periods of time. And so there needs to be a great deal of persistency for us to accurately understand our visitors. So as these third-party cookies go away, there are really 4 things that we need to keep in mind whenever we talk about how this is going to affect us as marketers. So reach is number 1. So we'll need to find a new way to reach our customers and prospects online. So they're going to become invisible to us. Just like we saw travelers become very invisible during the pandemic because they weren't transacting at attractions and restaurants and we weren't seeing them in the same way. Third-party cookies are going to do the same thing if you're relying on a third-party cookie. Personalization is going to be impacted. Campaign management, this is the big thing. If you are dependent on a third-party cookie, number 1, your campaigns are not going to be as efficient because you are over-serving, because you don't know if you're serving one of someone's 3 profiles and it's one person or actually to 3 people. So campaign management is going to be impacted. And then performance measurement. That's really my big thing, is for the measurement and the insights, because not only is the work that we do in ad tech so important, because not only are we promoting and building our brand and getting on consideration list, but also we're getting so much insight back that enable us to understand our visitors more and be more effective as destination marketers. And if we're relying on third-party cookies, number 1, the data that we're getting in is likely flawed. Number 2, with cookies going away, really this is going to impact the persistency of our data itself. So I love this slide right here. And this is going to be recorded and you'll be able to obviously have access to this, but I would encourage you to keep this slide on hand. This is a great resource that talks about different options for identifiers. Really, first-party identifiers are becoming the bellwether for personalized interaction and increased traveler engagement, but there really are different options out there. And really, when you look at this list, so we look at third-party cookies down to name and address data tied to actual transactions, while as we move further down the list, really the persistency and the accuracy of this data does increase with these data types, but none of them really can act and operate well in isolation alone. You really need to have multiple data sources that you're pulling together to build really a true identity versus a data point or a signal that you're using to identify your individuals. So again, I would encourage y'all, if you're not screenshotting it right now, to go back, watch the recording, and then keep this on hand. It's a great resource. It's also good whenever you're training your new teams or teams that are wanting to be more educated on the digital space and different options out there. This is a great resource in your organization as persons are getting ramped up with that. So let's talk about profile versus identity. This is such an important topic for us because oftentimes in our industry, we are talking about profiles because we have the luxury of the fact that persons are very often inclined to be part of loyalty programs. So our high value travelers, our frequent travelers are part of those loyalty programs. And so we have these profiles that are out there. We also have identity-based solutions and we work with a lot of them. So talking about, let's take a step back here and let's talk about traveler identity and why individual traveler identity is so important for our industry. So we really are in the people business. And as we move forward with data-driven approaches, it's imperative that we're accurate in how we understand our visitors by creating those personalized and genuine experiences for them. So I know we've all been served an ad that you can tell is kind of canned. They don't really know you. Maybe you get an ad for a rental car 2 days after you booked your rental car, or a destination serves and says, come, first time visiting here, come get a special, and you just left a resort a month before. So we want to make sure that we are genuine in our advertising and that we are data-driven in how we do all of our activities, because advocacy is so imperative for our industry. As we all saw the last 3 years, advocacy is key. It's been at the core of what destination marketers and destination marketing organizations do, but really it's going to continue to be very important as the market starts to stabilize. And the measurement accuracy is key to success. Really, as destinations, we're fortunate that we have a great deal of data and a variety of data. We have multiple partners that we work with, both in terms of advertising, but also in our destinations. And so we do have some challenges, though. While we have a lot of data available to us, we have to understand how or if our data sets work together. We also have to make sense of the gaps that we have, because very rarely are we going to have, as an industry, a full cohesive picture of our visitor. But there are going to be gaps, but it's okay as long as we understand what those gaps are. And then we also have to understand the persistency of the data that we have. And we have to understand, is it available for us and able for us to actually make positive trending off of it? So really, I keep going back to persistency, because when we talk about travel behaviors, a lot of travel behavior that we have seen change over the last 3 years has been a permanent change. We have seen certain trends go away over time, but we've seen a lot of trends that have stayed the same. And so having that persistency to be able to look at travel over multiple years and understand the trends within it are very key for us to really understand our market. So I touched on this a little bit ago, but let's talk about a profile versus an identity. So an identity is built upon and constructed with profiles. So oftentimes, as I mentioned, our profiles for our industry are linked to social media accounts, travel brand accounts. So if you're a Marriott Bonvoy, if you're a Delta loyalty member, those are all profiles that we often use in our industry for measurement and for advertising and targeting. They're very, very valuable, but they are fragmented. We are not going to see the complete picture of our traveler if we are just relying on a profile. And that can often create a scenario where we're very blind to important trends. Now, whenever we look at identity, this is persistent and this is addressable. So this takes into account both our online and offline signals and attributes. So this creates really a closed loop opportunity to both engage, measure, learn, and re-engage in a meaningful way when we're looking at that identity. So I'm a visual person, and those of y'all that know me also know that I am not good with animation on slides, but I really like the next few slides, and I would ask for your grace if I do mess them up, because let's visualize what building an identity actually looks like, because identity is really what we want to focus on as an industry here. So I'm going to use some industry specific examples as well as more general data categories as well to help us frame this picture of what building an identity looks like. So this is taking a view of how we look at identity at Epsilon. So this is kind of how we see data. So we see it as these tiny building blocks. So these are little bits and bytes that are created by the actions that people take all day, both online and offline. So these are things like their web activity, their email opens, their purchases, all generating more pieces of data throughout the day on these individuals. So these are little signals about what they have done and what they may want or need next that help us to determine what they look like as travelers or potential travelers for us. So you may have a little or a lot of this type of data about your visitors in your own organization. They're probably all not in one pile. They're from different vendors on your plan. So maybe you work with Epsilon, or maybe you work with Adara or Sojourn or TripAdvisor. They also might be from your different measurement resources. So if you work with geolocation data, or even partners in your community, if you work with hoteliers or cruise lines or attractions that have that data. So think about your insights and even think about a little bit beyond your direct sources to those non-traditional data sources, and think about the data that you might have laying around there. So you may be using some of these pieces to build a marketing campaign or other traveler personas or profiles. So for us at Epsilon, we look at cruisers. So cruise enthusiast, is someone a cruise enthusiast? Is someone a frequent traveler? Are they a high value traveler? So you're probably, chances are doing some of this in your own organization already with your partners. So when developing an identity, a cohesive and persistent identity, it's all about connecting. It's about connecting these different data points from both offline and online, which are so important for us at Epsilon. So again, it's those website visits, it's those email opens, it's those offline purchases. They all come together for us at Epsilon and how we look at an individual identity And really, this starts to fill out what is a connected identity. So connected identity is so key when we talk about the future of advertising and we talk about measurements. So for us, wherever there are gaps for our clients and the identities that they have, so they have all these profiles, but there are gaps, we fill them in with our people cloud. So with those known persons, those 200 plus million Americans, we fill them in with what's called our people cloud. So we use the data that our customers have generated across our partner network, and then we fill that in to create a true connected identity and that holistic look of the individual. So when we talk about connected identity, this is what it kind of looks like. Again, I'm a visual person here, so I'm going to walk us through some visualizations here. So we have Tony here. So we have Tony has 3 email addresses and 2 mobile phones. Tony is a very, very busy person. So obviously a lot of this is PII. And so we have to be careful with how we work with that. So at that point, that's where we are able to pseudonymize it and really create a privacy safe environment. And that's where you start to come up with these rich profiles, and you have this identity resolution that's coming, that's available for Tony here, which now is this non-identified person. So identity resolution and privacy is at the core of what we do. And it's at the core of what's going to actually drive our industry forward with lasting and persistent insights. For us, what this means is that actually 98%, of our impressions are actually tied to a core ID. So an actual user, a person who has online and offline identifiers. So I think it's really interesting. I learned a fun fact in some training the other day, because as I mentioned, I'm only 6 months in, I'm still doing a lot of training, is that our clients have actually seen a 25% increase in ad delivery on Safari following the 2017 deprecation by using identity-based solutions with us. That just, as a total data geek, that just blows my mind. So really, this is so important because that's how you're able to get scale, depths of insights, and persistency, is by relying on an identity. So looking at your profiles in a holistic nature, combining them, filling those gaps, building out that true individual identity of that person that's holistic. So let's talk about kind of what this means as we move into 2023 in the marketplace. So right now, it's really important that we're growing our brand because consumers are trying new brands as they have reduced barriers to switch, and they're seeking different travel experiences. Brand swapping is happening a great deal right now. Consumers are very price conscious. They also have changed behaviors. There's also, whenever we talk about proximity, there's been a great deal of shuffle with persons even moving. So take myself, in the last 3 years, I've moved from Chicago to Atlanta. Atlanta is the home of Delta. I have now changed from being an American Airlines traveler to a Delta traveler. There's a lot of brand swapping that's happening, and there's a lot of loyalty that's up for grabs. And as we all know, it's easier to get a visitor to come back to our brand, our destination, and it's less expensive than to acquire a new one. So right now, it's really an opportunity for us to continue to take advantage of the stabilization that's happening and really build upon this pent-up demand to grow our loyalty and our repeat visitation. So right now, pent-up demand is expected to really carry our industry through the medium term. Competition, though, is getting stronger. So this morning, CEO of United was talking, and as he said, really, Asia is the only market that's not open right now. So when we talk about some of the return numbers that we were having for our advertising and marketing efforts a year ago, it's going to be even harder for us to get them now because consumer confidence is wavering a little bit. Also, there's more places for people to go, more options for them to do. And when we look at this, kind of putting the numbers to it, Destination Analyst, their most recent survey showed that 30% of US travelers actually plan to travel abroad in the next 12 months. When persons before had hesitations for going overseas, we're seeing that a large share of Americans are planning to actually go overseas. So more competition from a domestic standpoint. And then the majority of consumers recognize or expect that a recession is coming. And we're looking at probably 2/3 of consumers that are being very careful with their money in anticipation of this. And so it's really imperative that as destination and travel brand marketers, that we are creating and capturing organic demand and creating repeat visitation. So what I mean by organic demand is not just talking to people who are going to our destinations anyways, but inspiring those persons who we already weren't on the consideration list or who haven't been to our destination before, and getting on that consideration list and moving them to book and to purchase with us. And so that's really where the opportunity lies. And so as we look at really the numbers continue to be strong for our industry, it's so important that we start to think about share. And we don't just look at volume alone, and how do we create that growth, and how do we lead the marketplace? So let's talk about really 3 ways that the travel industry can accomplish some of these goals. So really, it's important to understand the ebbing digital landscape to be a proactive marketer, and understand what implications this has on your traveler insights. So there's no one data set out there that's going to be perfect. If it was, it would be the standalone provider of all data in the marketplace. All data is going to have its limitations, and the landscape is going to change. Persistency is there with some data, but also we need to understand what persistency looks like across our data ecosystem. And so understanding that and helping to educate your stakeholders on what those changes mean that you can be very accurate in your activities and in your reporting, really driving a lot of performance for the destination. So really educate stakeholders on how you're staying ahead of the curve. That's something that's so important in our industry, is making sure that you have that buy-in, that you have that your partners have that seat at the table to really, they don't have to be digital experts or advertising experts, but they need to have that confidence that you and your team are taking the steps that we need as an industry to really drive accountable and strong performance. And then really create authentic demand by having identity-first solutions. This is so important, that we are not just churning with low-hanging fruit as an industry, but that we are creating authentic interest, that we are bringing people back to our destinations, and that people are having those experiences, that they are engaging with us and they are coming back time and time again, and that we have the tools that we need to be able to reach them and create that demand. So I love this Henry Ford quote. And as we head into the end of the new year, I want to leave us with this before we open it to Q&A. So Henry Ford said this quote that I really like here is, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So I leave us with this before we go to questions, to encourage us all to think big and make bold decisions. Encourage your peers and your partners to think big as we head into 2023, and continue to think about what's next for our industry and for your destination. So with that, looks like we've had a couple questions come through here. I am going to actually stop sharing my screen so that I can read those in a little bit larger font, even though I have on my glasses. Let's see here. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. Let's see. Looking at this here, if y'all don't mind. Okay. With all the changes happening in the industry, what is your first step for a marketer to be successful? I think the first step is really to create an inventory of the insights and resources that you have available. We as an industry have been really fortunate the last several years that we've had a lot of funding come through. If you're on the travel brand side, definitely understand that you have been struggling with a lot of revenue issues, but from the destination marketing side, there's been a lot of funding there. But with that, we've done a lot more in terms of advertising, marketing, that's generated a lot of information. And as we move into the next year, we need to continue to be advocates for our industry. And so with that, I would inventory all the resources and data that you have available. Think about those non-traditional data sources that you have. Think about your partners within your community. I always go back to this really basic example. So I worked with a small community in Texas about destination development. And they were saying, hey, we're small. We don't have a lot of data. We don't have a big budget. But I started noticing as I spent a few days with the destination that the different attractions, the restaurants, the stores, they all had sign-in sheets, but they all were asking for different information. So what we ended up doing is using a universal sign-in sheet that gathered the same data points about visitors. And then they worked with the local university to actually compile those to see where visitors were coming from, and then see, were they just going to the restaurant, or were they also going to the railroad museum? So think outside of the box is something I would encourage. And then sign up for news alerts about changing data and data privacy. That way, over your morning coffee, tea, your soda drinker, whatever it may be, your morning muffin, you can stay current with the latest news and share that with your team. So let's see. All right, we have another good question here. So I spoke about gaps in developing identities. So what's an example of a gap and how would you fill in that gap? So a gap with identities would be if you are a travel brand. And so as a travel brand, you have information from your loyalty programs. So people give you their address, zip code, email, phone. You're able to see how much that they are able to shop or buy within your brand. So going to your destination or your resorts that you have, but you're not able to see what they're doing outside of that. So being able to then bring in, for example, transaction-based or point of sale. I'm a big proponent of point of sale data, bringing that point of sale data to see outside of your resort, where else are they spending within the destination and how can you keep them on property more? Another gap that sometimes can be seen is looking at retail behavior outside of travel and tourism. This is something that we worked with some clients early in, coming out of the pandemic, that I really liked, is that we were wanting to make sure that we weren't serving ads to persons who had just transacted at a destination before the pandemic. And we said, great, let's target those people. What we were doing is we were actually looking at their purchase behavior. So looking at, were those people only shopping on or buying Uber Eats, paying for Netflix upgrades, doing grocery deliveries? So whether they were a frequent traveler before, if they were doing that only with their purchasing in 2022, they probably weren't going to come to your destination. So what we wanted to do is build profiles of not only frequent travelers, but travelers that were shopping with those travel brands. So like the Aways of the world, that were actually buying airline tickets on any airline. So that's something that we really did. That was a neat project that we worked on, because I think it's so interesting because, it took people different amounts of time to come into the marketplace. Let's see here. We have another one here. So I'm a DMO and I know Epsilon for NEI. How is that different from some of the data that you talked about today? You did not talk about NEI. I did not talk about NEI. So NEI is how most of the destinations work with Epsilon. NEI is our net economic impact, and it's a fascinating tool. As I mentioned, I'm a data geek. So NEI actually uses point of sale data. And what I really like about point of sale data is that it is not dependent on the credit card. It is the actual point of sale happening at a destination or a brand. So we're able to actually see the transaction itself. So with NEI, we are able to work with destinations or even travel brands to target based off of actual card swipes in destination, on property, with brand. And it's able to be card agnostic. So as I was talking about the core earlier, we see that we've got $15 trillion in transactions that we have in our data set, and it's card agnostic. And the reporting that we get out on that actually covers not only just spending within the traditional travel industries, we think about it, but also throughout the destination. So looking at things like retail, food and beverage, attractions. So it really provides this great tool from an advocacy standpoint that you can take to your stakeholders to say, hey, you know what, transportation organization, this is how much that visitors spend in our destination who we serve ads to that contribute to your coffers. And these are actual dollars. So I really, really like that. Let's see, Kathy, I've got one more here. And it looks like we've got time for that. So I mentioned advocacy, and the ask is I explain a little bit more how this fits with the topic of digital. So advocacy is so important for destination marketers. And it's something I get pretty fired up about because it is truly important, because whenever we look at our destinations, our cities, our communities that benefit the most from travel and tourism, it's often those small communities. So it's really those that need the support the most. So advocating for our industry is such an important item. So when we talk about advocacy and digital, not only is it that we now have data that we can go back to our legislators, our city councilmen, and we can say, these are confirmed persons. These are confirmed card transactions that happened in our destination, or coming back and saying, this is how much engagement we drove with our online content or user generated content that we were able to generate. This is data that we're able to take that moves us from not only telling just a numbers and cents story, but taking it to a larger picture. So being able to show them that, really as going to our stakeholders and showing them that we are responsible marketers, showing them that we are staying ahead of the curve, and then being able to go back with data points that really we couldn't do several decades ago, and showing these confirmed individuals and insights on actual persons that are in our destinations. And really that also falls on us as destinations and destination marketers to make sure that we are providing the 101, whether it's us ourselves as destination marketers, putting on my Travel Texas Explore Georgia hat, or bringing in partners like myself or any of our team at Epsilon, or partners that through the Travel and Tourism Research Association, to come in and maybe do a lunch and learn and help them understand the digital landscape and make sure that you're bringing them that seat at the table. So that's where I was talking about with advocacy. But if y'all would like to get into that and talk about it a little bit more on kind of a one-to-one basis and maybe what that means for your destination, would very happy to do that with you. Let's see. I don't see any other questions that have come through to me directly or in the chat. Looks like that's all the questions.
Andrea, thank you so much. We appreciate all of your insights. The recording will be available to everyone. We'll be sending that information out. And I also took a screenshot of the slide that you said everyone should, and I will attach that to the email that goes out so everybody will have that.
Wonderful.
So thank you very much. And I hope everybody enjoyed the webinar.
Yes, thank you all for having me, and thank you for joining today.